When I first viewed American History X as a teenager, I loved it, and even with repeat viewings, the luster of the film did not go away. The picture's guerrilla presentation, coupled with great performances and a raw, emotional story, had me hooked. I was such a fan that at a certain time I would routinely say, to anyone who would listen, that Edward Norton was robbed of the Oscar for Best Actor. Boy, how wrong I was. After analyzing the film beyond its distractionary elements, I have done a 180 and have realized that this movie, basically all of it, is hot garbage. Let's start out by analyzing the film's plot. If you look at the actual storytelling done in the movie, it is very, very limited. The film is broken down into two timelines. Shots in the film in color represent the film's present day in which the actual plot of the story is moved along, and shots in black and white represent the past and serve as a vehicle to describe character evolution which justifies the decisions they make in the plot of the colorful present day. The majority of the film is presented in black and white, meaning most of the screen's runtime is dedicated to the protagonist, Derek Vineyard's character evolution, and very little is dedicated to the actual plot of the story. Given the paucity of time dedicated to the actual story, the plot is simply this. Younger brother Daniel is a member of a skinhead gang and follows the troubled path of his incarcerated neo-Nazi older brother Derek. Derek is released from prison a new man, saves his brother after release, but it is too late as the evil sown by the Vineyard boys catches up with them and Danny is shot in his school a day or a few days after his change of heart with his brother. The plot of this film is straightforward and simplistic. This is not necessarily a negative with this film or any movie that operates under a straightforward narrative. It just needs to be pointed out that this movie is character development driven and not plot driven in order to dissect the further points of the film going forward. In American History X, the plot does not move the characters move the plot. It is a character driven film, and the central figure of this film is Derek Vineyard. This means that to understand the movie is to understand Derek. Derek, we are told, is a brilliant student and star basketball player who takes a turn for the worst when his firefighter father is shot dead by two black drug dealers while he attempted to put out a fire at their house. After this, he joins up with Cameron Alexander to start a Venice Beach neo-Nazi gang where he and others descend into bigoted madness in which he goes on hateful anti-immigrant rants, trashes immigrant businesses, and tops it off by murdering two black members of the Crips who attempted to steal his car. For these murders, he serves 3 years in state penitentiary. Fine. This is all well and good, but the turning point in Derek's character evolution, in which he goes from bloodthirsty, tatted-up skinhead neo-Nazi to flower-smelling, book-loving egalitarian, is while he is in prison. The small plot of the film only moves forward due to this change, meaning that Derek's change in perspective is no small endeavor, and justifying this change is crucial to forming a cohesive plot. Derek's change of heart is fueled by two major incidents: his friendship with his laundry partner, a black guy named Lamont, and his neo-Nazi prison gang turning on him. The first point, the friendship between Lamont and Derek, is completely irrational in how it is developed that it is actually laughable when you look at it in depth. With a limited plot to work with and desperate to quickly justify Derek's change in outlook on black people, the writers shoehorn a dinnertime insult by Derek towards the KKK as the driver, which would later bond Derek and Lamont. Before we get into the finer, ridiculous details of this exchange, think about the broader picture of what established the Derek and Lamont friendship. Derek, a neo-Nazi with multiple Nazi images and swastikas tattooed prominently on his body, who blames black people for the death of his father and is in prison for murdering, that's right, murdering, two black Crips, is united in friendship with a black guy in prison based on their mutual hatred of the KKK. Excuse me, what? One throwaway comment at a dinner conversation justifies this impossible friendship. Okay. The plot establishes that Derek has a blind hatred towards black people, and given the way he treats Lamont initially, the lack of remorse he shows for murdering 2 black people, and the giant swastika tattooed on his left pec, you would think that this would be painfully obvious to Lamont. However, their bond is formed in a tense moment between the two as they are working in the laundry room. Eager to have an amicable working relationship with Derek, Lamont decides to dissolve the tension by using a spare sheet as a KKK hood and going on an inbred rant against blacks in a southern drawl. Somehow, magically, this tactic works. Derek acquiesces and starts to act moderately nicer towards Lamont in the wake of his KKK insult. So let's break this down. A streetwise black guy, who we learn later has a lot of influence over the black gangs in the prison, ignores the obvious cues of Derek's bigotry and feels the best way to establish rapport with him is by lampooning neo-Nazis, but of the redneck variety. What indicators would Lamont pick up on that would indicate that the only thing that would get Derek and his murderous hatred towards black people on his side as a black man? Oh, that's right, their shared disdain for redneck neo-Nazis. Of course, that makes sense. Derek, in that state of having just murdered 2 black people and the memories of his dead father murdered by blacks, would totally think a black guy making fun of other white people to be hysterical. Of course. The start of their slow building friendship is so ridiculous and so shoehorned in that we are supposed to believe that it is actually plausible for this to happen. Not because of logic or because of the character presentation we are given, but only because the writers, eager to justify such a partnership, tell us that it is justifiable. I mean, maybe the Lamont character has a gift and can read minds or something, because that is the only thing that can make sense of his illogical actions. The other reason Derek turns against his neo-Nazi principles is that the neo-Nazi gang he joins in prison betrayed what he felt were its fundamental ideals when some of its members were doing drug deals with Mexican inmates and turning around and selling it back to white prisoners. After Derek turns his back on the gang retaliates against him by viciously gang raping him in the shower. After this incident, he is comforted by an unlikely ally, his old black high school teacher, Dr. Sweeney, who comforts him and helps him get through the rest of his term in prison from the outside. Now, this is justifiable, and if written correctly, could have also justified the Lamont friendship as well. If the order of these events was switched and the gang betrayal occurred before the Derek-Lamont amicable partnership began, then the shoehorned nonsensical KKK joke would be unnecessary, as Derek's slow evolution to trusting black people would be organic and understandable. If Derek were to have been first betrayed by the people who he felt were his brothers, and in the fallout is aided by Dr. Sweeney and Lamont, that would make his slow turn palatable. This movie is about Derek's character growth and the consequences it has on everyone around him. We follow Derek through the depths of his hatred and resurrection and see him come full circle. However, this development is completely neutered by one scene, the dinner scene. In this one scene, the veil is removed from the shadowy figure of Derek's father, Dennis Vineyard. Up until that point, Dennis Vineyard is mentioned briefly, but his presence looms large over Derek's character development. As an audience member, Dennis's limited description presents him as a good man who worked an honest job, and after his death, without his oversight, his 2 sons descended into madness. This brief but impactful summation of who Derek's father was assumed to be in the beginning of the film allows the story to unfold and makes Derek solely culpable for his actions and influence on his younger brother Danny. In a character-driven story, the characters, the protagonist especially, need to be held fully accountable for their actions and beliefs in order to justify the story. This was the case with Derek until the dinner scene with his father completely altered his character evolution. At the end of the movie, we get a flashback to a Vineyard family dinner where it is revealed that Dennis, who we assume to be a noble man who worked an honest job and suffered the unfortunate fate of being murdered by the people he was attempting to help, was actually a racist pig who spewed his bigoted views to his growing adolescent children. Throughout this dinner tirade, he laments black authors, black teachers, affirmative action, and tops it off by dropping an N-bomb to his oldest son in front of the rest of his family. In a vacuum, this sowing the seeds narrative would be okay if the film was not so character-driven. But this dialogue from his dad, especially given how immense his presence was over the evolution of Derek throughout the entire film, completely kneecaps Derek's character. Instead of Derek's character evolution being driven by himself and his own motivations, his father's rant gives him an out, and worse yet, presents the audience with a sense of inevitability concerning his journey towards a life of racial hatred. The death of his father is the most seminal moment in the film, as it represented the moment Derek decided to dedicate himself to a life of racial hatred. Without this event, there is no descent into hate and subsequent retribution, which is basically what the movie is. As soon as Derek's father is revealed to be a bitter, hateful man, the impact his death should have had on his son is dulled immensely and loses much of its initial meaning. The limited plot reveals its ugly head once more in the form of how a newly reformed Derek acts after being let out of prison. Given what we know about what Derek endured in prison, the manner in which his release is handled is beyond ridiculous. Derek was locked away in the state penitentiary for 3 years. And even though we are used to hearing sentences like 25 years and multiple life sentences thrown around for criminals on the regular, 3 years is a long time to be locked away without any freedom. Also, add to the fact that not only did he lose his freedom, but in these 3 years, he had his entire worldview and everything he thought he knew for certain crash down around him. Oh, and also, he was the victim of a brutal shower gang rape from the people he once trusted. These are monumental events that are completely glossed over in this film. Derek and how he deals with being a free man after release, especially after what he endured during his time in prison, is barely even mentioned. He just picks up right where he left off, no damage or acclamation necessary. This acclamation to a life outside of prison is so glossed over that Derek decides to immediately, without any rest, get down to business and engage in the highly dangerous ordeal of rescuing his brother from the neo-Nazi gang he established. He even agrees at the end of the movie to go undercover to spy on the Nazi gang, a very dangerous mission. And to boot, he agrees to do this the day after he was released. I mean, Jesus Christ, the guy was raped by a gang of thugs, was behind bars in the state penitentiary for 3 years, and he doesn't even get a month, a week, a day to sit back and enjoy his freedom for just a little bit? Huh? Given what he went through physically and psychologically, it wouldn't even make sense that he would even have the energy and resolve to take on these types of tasks immediately upon release. Ask any person who was let back into the world after being in prison for a short or extended period. Ask them how easy the adjustment was. Most will tell you that they can never adjust and will have to live the rest of their lives as an awkward outsider in the real world. However, in this film, there is no adjustment or struggle. He can not only get back to his old life as easy as flipping on a light switch, but he has no problem putting himself and his family in serious danger on the same day he is released from a 3-year prison term. Unreal. This film is about Derek Vineyard and how his actions and decisions influence the lives of those around him. Younger brother Danny Vineyard is a very, very important character, as he is the most direct litmus test of the effect Derek's decisions have on the world around him, as he is the person closest to Derek and most impressionable. However, Danny does not drive the story. Therefore, when Danny is shot in school by a rival black student, this should not have been treated as the conclusion of the film. Danny is the measuring stick which reflects on Derek. That was how the film was set up from the get-go. The story is not about Danny's journey, it is about Derek's. Therefore, when the consequences of Derek's actions, which influenced his brother down a pernicious path and led to his early death, happened, the story needed to conclude with Derek's reaction to the situation in which he created. The lack of reaction is a stunning oversight of closure, given how the movie focuses primarily on Derek's character evolution. Derek's brother was shot dead at 17 years old because of him. His reaction doesn't need to be shown in great depth, but we at least need to know what it was. Did he have a quick turnaround and go back to being a skinhead leader, realizing that prison was just a mirage of his true reality? Does he blame Cameron and the neo-Nazi gang for his brother's death and go forward with the undercover mission in order to bring them down from the inside? Does he kill himself out of grief due to the harm he brought to his family? Does he move away and not deal with it? Anything would suffice. It can't be left open-ended in the way it was. The movie sacrificed the majority of its runtime in developing Derek's character at the expense of a more detailed plot. Yet when this character is set to face the most pernicious, damning consequence of his many ill-advised choices, that is when they decided to roll to credits. Edward Norton did a good job, a very good job in this movie, but was it a great performance worthy of an Oscar? Debatable. His dedication to the role is not to be questioned, however, the greatness of his performance is due in larger part to the presentation of the film than of the actual acting. Ed Norton, in my opinion, did a very standard cookie-cutter presentation of the textbook angry, violent bigot. The reason his performance was so menacing was the presentation and the set pieces around him. The flashback scenes in which Derek was in the midst of his neo-Nazi life phase was presented in black and white. The raw visual elements of a black and white presentation, which strip away the life from every scene, was so profound that it reduced every character in the movie to their most fundamental ethos during these scenes. The performance was good, but to me, playing angry, roided-up Nazi with prominent neo-Nazi tattoos in black and white setting in which his eyes look like black holes is not a difficult role to play to intimidate the average movie viewer who probably lives in the suburbs. In my estimation, the people who put the picture together and edited it deserve more credit for the character presentation than do the actors. Like most films that center around young, hateful neo-Nazi characters, the film relies more on placement of menacing imagery and violent characters to garner a reaction from the audience, as opposed to crafting an intricate story that captures the viewer's interest. Similar to commensurate films, the story uses the shock value of swastikas, bald heads, and short-fused fanaticism to compensate for an overly simplistic plot. As stated before, not all films require an intricate plot to be quality movies. However, in the case of neo-Nazi films, it just seems that the hate-filled imagery and inanimate objects are relied upon too much to elicit an emotional reaction from the viewing audience and not the nuances of the characters and the stories presented. Now, these are smaller but noteworthy aspects of the film that didn't require fleshing out, but have always bugged me and get worse with every subsequent viewing. I couldn't end my review of this movie without touching upon these grievances. First, how was it that after Derek's father died and he assumed the role as head of the house, that he allowed his mother to not only date a Jew, but to bring him over to the house for family dinner? Was Derek's neo-Nazi gang the first in history to not care about anti-Semitism and solely focus their hatred on black people and immigrants? And further, he was the leader of the neo-Nazi gang. Wouldn't you think something like this would cause him to get removed from a leadership position in the gang? Secondly, and this ties in with the dinner in a way, but I find it amusing how everyone on the outside world is so eerily calm at the sight of swastikas and skinheads. The Jewish boyfriend at the dinner table, his mother, his progressive sister, the principal at the school, the black guys at the basketball court, they seem to pay no attention whatsoever to the gigantic swastikas and Nazi symbols tattooed and shown prominently on Derek and his friends. Now, in the real world, one person who has even the smallest swastika placed anywhere on or near him would cause everyone in a 2-mile radius to turn their heads and stare at this person as if he were a zoo animal. Next, the fact that in almost every scene in color or in the present day, the members of the family are always hugging or putting their arms around each other or are being playful in an over-the-top way is just so silly. To see this once or twice in a film is fine, but to highlight this again and again and again is just cheesy. I get that you are trying to contrast the energy between the black and white flashbacks and the colorful present day, but a little restraint would have made the whole thing seem a lot more natural. And finally, Derek's big confrontation with Cameron, the head of the gang, to tell him that he and his brother are out, ends with the weakest insult of all time. Chicken hawk? Really? That is the slander that gets the head of a large California neo-Nazi gang to lose his mind? Okay then.
Yeah, but it doesn't even really matter if I don't, does it? Because you got the next crop all lined up and ready to go, you fucking chicken hawk.
Excuse me?
I'm a chicken hawk, and I'm gonna take you home.
Go, you fucking chicken hawk.